The convoy had been rolling through the Afghan border region for 6 hours when the lead MRAP ground to a halt at the edge of Kalwar settlement. Dust swirled around the armored vehicles like a curtain being drawn across a stage. Corporal Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the reinforced window of the third vehicle in line, her eyes scanning the cluster of mud brick buildings that stretched along the narrow road ahead. Something was wrong. She felt it before she could articulate what she was seeing. The wrongness lived in the silence, in the absence of the chaos that usually defined these border settlements. No children running between vehicles begging for candy. No merchants rushing out with their wares. No livestock wandering the packed dirt streets. The shutters on every building were closed. Elena leaned forward, her supply manifest forgotten on her lap. She counted the windows facing the convoy, 14 on the left, 11 on the right, all sealed tight despite the afternoon heat that should have driven every villager to seek whatever crossbreeds they could find. "Why are we stopping here?" she asked. Specialist Torres, the driver, shrugged without taking his eyes off the vehicle ahead. Scheduled resupply halt. Captain's orders. Supposed to link up with the ANA patrol that's been working the sector. Elena looked again at those shuttered windows. The settlement stretched for perhaps 200 meters ahead, buildings crowding the road on both sides. A perfect corridor. A perfect kill zone. "Something's wrong," she said. Torres glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. His expression held the dismissive patience that everyone in the unit had perfected when dealing with her. "It's fine, Vasquez. Just another dusty village in the middle of nowhere. Relax." She wanted to argue. She wanted to grab him by the shoulder and point out what she was seeing. But she was just the supply corporal, the one who counted boxes and filled out requisition forms. The dead weight. That's what Sergeant First Class Brennan had called her 3 days ago, and the word still burned in her chest like an ember that wouldn't die. Dead weight. A warm body filling a slot that could have gone to someone useful. The convoy commander's voice crackled over the radio, authorizing the halt. Doors began opening along the line of vehicles. Soldiers stepped out into the dust, stretching, reaching for water bottles, checking weapons more out of habit than alertness. Colonel Marcus Harding emerged from the command vehicle at the center of the convoy, his silver oak leaves catching the harsh sunlight. Even from 60 meters away, Elena could see the easy confidence in his posture. This was his 15th deployment. He'd walked through 100 settlements just like this one, but he hadn't seen what she was seeing. The door beside her opened. "Out, Vasquez," Specialist Torres ordered. "Time to earn your paycheck. Supply cache is supposed to be in that building on the right. Get eyes on it and report back." Elena stepped out of the MRAP, her boots crunching on gravel. The heat hit her like a wall, but it was a silence that made her skin crawl. She could hear the convoy's engines idling, soldiers talking in low voices, the distant cry of a bird. Nothing else. No goats. No chickens. No dogs. She started walking toward the supply point, but her eyes kept moving. Rooftops, alleyways, doorways. The training she received at Fort Benning years ago, the training that had nothing to do with supply logistics, was screaming at her now. Movement. The first rooftop on the left, a shadow that shifted against the mud brick parapet. Elena opened her mouth to shout a warning. The world exploded. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of courage under fire, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to show you how Elena Vasquez became the dead weight who saved her entire unit. The first RPG streaked down from the rooftop and slammed into the lead MRAP with sound like God hammering an anvil. The vehicle jumped sideways, smoke and flame erupting from its engine compartment. Before the echo died, a second rocket punched through the rear vehicle's armor. They were boxed in. Gunfire erupted from every direction at once. Muzzle flashes sparked in doorways, on rooftops, from alley mouths. The coordinated precision of the attack spoke to weeks of planning, to rehearsed kill zones and calculated fields of fire. Elena dubbed behind the nearest vehicle. As rounds cracked past her head, she could hear soldiers screaming, some in pain, some shouting orders that no one could follow. The radio squawked with overlapping transmissions before dissolving into static. Communications were jammed. She pressed her back against the MRAP's armored wheel well, her heart slamming against her ribs. Rounds sparked off the metal above her head. She could see boots moving on the other side of the vehicle, soldiers scrambling for cover without coordination, without leadership. Lieutenant Davidson sprinted across the open ground toward the command vehicle, his M4 tucked against his shoulder. He made it 15 meters before a burst from a rooftop position caught him across the chest plate. The impact spun him sideways, and he went down hard in the dust, not moving. "Lieutenant's down," someone screamed. "Where is it coming from?" "Everywhere. It's coming from everywhere." Elena watched the chaos unfold with a clarity that seemed to slow time itself. She could see the attack's architecture now, could read its geometry. The rooftop shooters were providing suppressive fire, keeping heads down. The alley teams were maneuvering closer, working toward positions where they could finish the job. And somewhere ahead, she could hear the distinctive bark of a PK machine gun, its rounds chewing through cover and keeping the wounded pinned in the open. The perimeter had collapsed in less than 30 seconds. Soldiers who should have been establishing defensive positions were scattered behind vehicles, behind rubble, behind anything that might stop a bullet. Nobody was shooting back with any coordination. Nobody was directing fire. The unit was dying by degrees. Elena forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, just like they taught her, just like she practiced 1,000 times before the army decided she was better suited for counting bullets than firing them. She looked around the wheel well and immediately pulled back as rounds sparked off the metal. But she'd seen enough. Sergeant First Class Brennan, the unit's designated marksman, was down 15 meters away, his body crumpled against a disabled truck. His right arm hung at an angle that made her stomach lurch. And beside him, untouched, lay the M24 sniper rifle, the M24A3 with its Leupold scope, its effective range of 800 meters, its ability to reach out and touch someone before they even knew they were dead, the weapon that could break this ambush. Elena stared at it through the dust and smoke, her mind racing through calculations she hadn't performed in years. The rooftop shooter on the left was approximately 200 meters out, the one on the right maybe 160. The PKM position was further, maybe 275, dug into a reinforced position at the corner of a building. She could make those shots. She knew she could, but she was Supply Corps. She wasn't authorized. She wasn't qualified. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to be in combat, wasn't supposed to be anything more than the dead weight everyone believed her to be. A soldier she didn't recognize broke from cover and tried to reach Lieutenant Chun. He made it 8 meters before the PKM cut him down. His body tumbled across the packed dirt and lay still, his M4 falling from nerveless fingers. Elena made her decision. She burst from cover and sprinted toward Brennan's position, her boots pounding the ground as rounds cracked past her ears. She felt one tug at her sleeve, another clipped the edge of her helmet. She didn't slow down. She couldn't slow down. She slid into cover beside Brennan, her shoulder slamming into the disabled truck's tire. The sergeant was conscious, barely, his face gray with pain and blood loss. His eyes found hers, confusion swimming in their depths. "Vasquez? What the hell are you?" "Your arm," she said. "How bad?" "Shattered. Can't hold a rifle." "Can't," he coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Radio's dead. Command elements pinned. We're getting picked apart." Elena reached past him and grabbed the M24. The weight of it settled into her hands like an old friend, familiar despite the years, comfortable despite everything. She checked the chamber. Round seated, magazine full. "Vasquez, what are you doing? What needs to be done?" She rolled into a prone position behind the truck's engine block, using the tire as additional cover. The scope came up to her eye, and the world narrowed to a circle of magnified clarity. She found the first rooftop shooter immediately. Male, AK-47, prone behind a mud brick parapet, focused on suppressing the soldiers near the middle of the convoy. He never saw her. She adjusted for wind, adjusted for distance, let out half a breath, and squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the scope she watched the shooter jerk once and go still. His rifle slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the roof. "What the hell?" Brennan's voice was stunned. "How did you?" Elena was already shifting targets. The second rooftop shooter, 200 meters east, had heard the shot and was trying to locate its source. His mistake. He lifted his head above cover to search. She put a round through his throat. 2 down. She worked the bolt, seating another round. The brass casing ejected and bounced off the truck's tire. Smoke drifted across the settlement, but she could see through it. Could see the muzzle flashes marking enemy positions. Could read the battlefield the way she'd been trained to read it. Back before the Army decided her scores were a fluke. Back before they'd shuffled her into supply. Because they couldn't believe what she was. A woman who could shoot like the devil himself had signed her targets. She found the third rooftop shooter and put him down with a single round through the chest. Fourth shooter. Fifth. Each shot precise, economical, devastating. The rooftop fire began to slacken. Now the alley teams. She swung the rifle toward the left flank, where movement in a narrow passage had caught her attention. 3 fighters were stacked against the wall, preparing to push toward the wounded soldiers in the open ground. The lead man had an RPG, 7 on his shoulder. Elena put a round through the warhead. The secondary explosion consumed all 3 fighters in a ball of orange flame that rolled out the alley mouth like dragon's breath. She heard soldiers screaming, but this time it wasn't her people. Brennan was staring at her now, his pain temporarily forgotten. "Who the hell are you?" She didn't answer. The PKM was still firing, its heavy rounds still pinning the wounded in the open. Lieutenant Chin still hadn't moved. Neither had the soldier who tried to reach him. Every second that passed, more blood soaked into the Afghan dust. Elena shifted her position, moving to get an angle on the machine gun nest. The PKM team had chosen their position well, using a corner building for cover, firing through a reinforced window. Direct engagement would be difficult, but not impossible. She studied the position through her scope, calculating angles, measuring distances. The window was perhaps 18 inches wide. The shooter was set back from the opening, his muzzle flash visible, but his body protected by the thick mud brick walls. Conventional shot wouldn't work, but the building's construction was old, the mortar between bricks crumbling, and if she could punch through the wall at just the right angle. She adjusted her aim 6 inches left of the window frame. The wall there was shadowed, possibly thinner. A calculated gamble. She fired. The round punched through the weakened section of wall, spraying dust and debris inside the room. The PKM fell silent. 3 minutes. That's all it had taken. 3 minutes to dismantle an ambush that had been designed to annihilate her entire convoy. The silence that followed was almost more shocking than the gunfire had been. Soldiers who had been pinned down began to move. Cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Medics rushed toward the wounded. Shouts replaced screams as unit cohesion slowly reassembled itself. Elena lowered the rifle and sat back against the truck's tire, her hands suddenly shaking. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her cold and empty. She'd just killed, how many? 7? 8? She'd lost count somewhere after the RPG shot, and now she would have to face the consequences. You. The voice cut through the settling dust like a blade. Elena looked up to find Colonel Marcus Harding standing over her, his face twisted with an emotion she couldn't quite read. Fury, certainly, but something else too. Something that might have been disbelief. His eyes moved from her face to the M24 in her hands, then to Sergeant Brennan's shattered arm, then back to her. Who authorized her fire? The question wasn't directed at her. He was asking the soldiers who had gathered around, the medics treating Brennan, the NCOs emerging from cover. He was asking anyone who might give him an answer that made sense. No one spoke. I asked a question, Harding growled. Who authorized the supply corporal to pick up a sniper rifle and engage enemy combatants? The silence stretched, thick with tension. Finally, Elena spoke. No one, sir. Harding's gaze snapped back to her. No one. No one authorized you to abandon your assigned duties, acquire a weapon system you're not qualified on, and engage in direct combat operations without orders. That's correct, sir. Then explain to me, Corporal, exactly what the hell you think you were doing. Elena met his eyes. She'd spent 3 years taking the dismissive looks, the condescending tones, the assumptions about who she was and what she could do. She'd spent 3 years being deadweight. She was done apologizing for something that didn't need an apology. Soldiers were dying, sir. The designated marksman was incapacitated. Enemy fire was coordinated and overwhelming. I had the training to make a difference, so I made a difference. Training? Harding's voice rose. Your MOS is 92 Alpha. You're a supply specialist. What possible training could you have that qualifies you to? Fort Benning, sir. 2014. I completed the pre-sniper course with the highest scores in my class. Perfect accuracy. At 800 meters. Distinguished marksmanship badge. The review board recommended me for immediate assignment to a designated marksman role. Harding's expression shifted. Then why the hell are you counting boxes in a supply tent? Elena's jaw tightened. This was the part she never talked about, the part that defined her career ever since, shaping every duty assignment, every evaluation, every sideways glance from soldiers who thought they knew who she was. Because the reviewing officer didn't believe a woman could shoot that well. He assumed I'd cheated, changed my scores, recommended me for administrative duties instead. By the time I proved he was wrong, the slot was filled. I've been requisitioning ammunition ever since instead of firing it. The words hung in the air between them. Around her, she could see faces changing as soldiers processed what she just said. Brennan was staring at her with something that might have been respect or shame. Harding studied her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, closed off, the mask of commander processing tactical information. You broke protocol, he said finally. You abandoned your assigned post. You used a weapon system without authorization. You directly disobeyed standing orders regarding engagement authority. Yes, sir. If you hadn't, we'd be dead right now. Elena blinked. That wasn't what she'd expected him to say. I'm aware of the tactical situation, Corporal. I was there. Harding glanced around at the dead enemies scattered across rooftops and alleyways, at the smoke still rising from the destroyed RPG position. 14 confirmed kills in under 3 minutes. Single shooter. That's not luck. That's not adrenaline. That's training. Sir, I'm not finished. His voice cracked like a whip. What you did today saved lives. It also violated every regulation regarding engagement authority, weapons qualification, and duty assignment. You understand the position that puts me in. Elena nodded slowly. I do, sir. Good. Because I'm going to have to write a report about this. And that report is going to require a very specific explanation of how a supply corporal managed to achieve a combat performance that most designated marksmen would struggle to match. He was silent for a moment, his eyes still locked on hers. Get that rifle serviced. Make sure it's ready for use. Then report to Captain Martinez for debriefing. Elena's brow furrowed. Sir, did I stutter, Corporal? No, sir. It's just... She hesitated. Aren't you going to confiscate the weapon? Harding's expression didn't change. The weapon belongs to Sergeant Brennan. Currently, Sergeant Brennan can't hold a rifle, let alone fire one. Until we reach forward operating base, someone needs to maintain that capability. His eyes bored into hers. You have a problem with that? No, sir. Then move. Elena gathered herself in the M24, climbing to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced him to carry her toward the command vehicle where Captain Martinez was organizing the recovery effort. Behind her, she could hear Harding issuing orders, coordinating the evacuation of wounded, dispatching security teams to clear the remaining buildings. She could feel eyes on her back. The other soldiers were watching her now, watching with expressions that ranged from confusion to skepticism to something that looked almost like awe. Dead weight. Brennan had called her. She wondered if he still thought that. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Lieutenant Chun was evacuated by medevac helicopter, his condition critical but stable. Brennan went with him, his arm requiring surgery that couldn't be performed in the field. 3 other soldiers had sustained wounds, none life-threatening. 2 hadn't been so lucky. Specialist Rodriguez and Private First Class Okonkwo. Elena hadn't known them well, but she'd seen their faces in the mess tent, heard their voices in the motor pool. Now they were body bags being loaded onto a transport that would carry them home. The convoy couldn't stay in Kalwar settlement. The ambush had been too coordinated, too well planned. There would be follow-up attacks if they remained in place. So Harding ordered the column to move out, wounded loaded into functional vehicles, damaged MRAPs abandoned for recovery teams that might or might not arrive. They pushed north through the fading afternoon light, deeper into the mountains that marked the border region. The terrain grew harsher, the road narrowing to little more than a track carved into the hillside. On their left, the mountain rose in jagged walls of brown and gray. On their right, a steep slope fell away toward a valley floor 200 meters below. Elena rode in the fourth vehicle now, the M24 across her lap. Nobody commented on it. Nobody told her to put away. The other soldiers in the vehicle, Specialist Torres, Private Collins, Corporal Washington, kept glancing at her when they thought she wasn't looking. She pretended not to notice. The radio crackled with reports from the lead vehicle. All clear ahead. No movement on the ridge lines. The road conditions were deteriorating, but they should reach FOB Griffin before nightfall. Should. Elena stared out the window at the terrain sliding past. The mountains here were perfect ambush country. Dozens of positions where fighters could set up with clear sight lines to the road. Rocky outcroppings that would provide cover from return fire. Elevation that would make their shots drop at longer ranges. If she were planning an attack, this is where she would do it. The sun was touching the western peaks when Harding's voice came over the radio. All vehicles halt. We got possible movement on the ridge. 11 o'clock high. The convoy ground to a stop. Elena leaned forward, peering through the windshield at the distant ridgeline. She couldn't see anything, but that didn't mean there was nothing there. Probably goats, Torres muttered. These mountains are full of them. Goats don't carry rifles, Collins said. Can't see any rifles from here. Can't see anything from here. Colonel's being paranoid. Elena reached for the door handle. I need to get out. Torres turned to look at her. The colonel didn't authorize. Then he can tell me to get back in. She opened the door and dropped to the ground, the M24 already in her hands. The evening air was cooler at this altitude, carrying the scent of dust and distant snow. She moved to the front of the vehicle and went to one knee, bringing the scope to her eye. The ridge was perhaps 600 meters away, a jagged line of rock against a darkening sky. She scanned slowly, methodically, looking for anything out of place. A shape that didn't match the geology. Movement that didn't fit the wind. There, a flash of metal, just for a second, catching the last rays of sunlight before disappearing behind cover. Elena keyed her radio. Colonel Harding, this is Corporal Vasquez. I got a confirmed metallic signature on the ridge, bearing 11 o'clock, approximately 620 meters. Possible optic or weapon reflection. The radio hissed for a moment before Harding's voice came back. Can you confirm hostile intent? Negative, sir. But they're in a classic ambush position, and they're trying not to be seen. That's not friendly behavior. Silence. She could imagine Harding in the command vehicle, weighing options. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't go back. The only way was forward, directly through whatever waited on that ridge. Vasquez, report to command vehicle. Now. She jogged down the line of vehicles, the rifle cradled in her arms. Soldiers watched her pass, their expressions unreadable in the fading light. When she reached Harding's position, he was standing outside the vehicle with Captain Martinez and two squad leaders, studying the ridge through binoculars. Show me where you saw it, Harding ordered. Elena pointed. Approximately 40 meters left of that tall rock formation, sir. I only caught the reflection for a second, but it was definitely metallic, and it was moving. Harding lowered his binoculars and looked at her. His expression had changed since the earlier confrontation. There was still wariness there, still the instinctive distrust of someone who had broken his rules. But there was something else too. Calculation. How confident are you in that ID? 90%, sir. What would make 100? Another visual confirmation, or hostile action. Harding turned to Captain Martinez. Options. Martinez was a compact man with a boxer's build and 20 years of combat experience written in the scars on his face. He studied the terrain with the practiced eye of a veteran. We pushed through, we're sitting ducks. Roads too narrow for evasive maneuvers, and that ridge gives them perfect defilade. We go back. We're in the same position we were in Kalwar, Except now it's getting dark and we're lower on ammo. He paused. We could wait them out. If there's anyone up there, maybe they'll get impatient and show themselves. We're 12 clicks from FOB Griffin, Harding said. We got wounded who need proper medical care. Waiting is an option. Then we need to clear that ridge before we move. With what? Half our security element is wounded or dead. We don't have the manpower for a flanking assault. The squad leaders shifted uncomfortably. Elena could feel the weight of the tactical problem pressing down on all of them. They were trapped, caught between bad options and worse ones. She heard herself speak before she'd consciously decided to do so. I can clear it, sir. Every eye turned to her. Harding's expression tightened. Explain. Forward overwatch position. Elena pointed to a rocky outcropping perhaps 400 meters ahead, on the same side of the road as the ridge, but at a lower elevation. I can reach that position in 15 minutes on foot. From there, I have a clear angle on the ridge while the convoy moves past. If anyone up there opens fire, I'll have shots. If they don't, we pass through without incident. You'd be exposed, Martinez said. If they have multiple positions, you'd be caught in a crossfire. The outcropping provides cover from the ridge. Secondary positions would have to be on the opposite slope to flank me, and that terrain is too exposed. They'd be skylined against the sunset. Elena met his eyes steadily. I can do this, sir. It's what I'm trained for. Harding was silent for a long moment. Elena could see the conflict playing out behind his eyes. Everything she was proposing violated procedure. A single soldier, alone, acting as overwatch for a convoy, it was irregular, unorthodox, and potentially suicidal. But it might also be their only option. The rifle, Harding said finally, how many rounds you have? 23 in the magazine, sir. 40 more in my kit. And if there are more than 23 enemies on that ridge, Elena allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Then I'll need to be more careful with my shot selection, sir. Harding stared at her. Then, incredibly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Martinez, get the convoy ready to move. Vasquez, you got 15 minutes to reach that outcropping. Once you're in position, signal with 2 red flashes. We'll move on your mark. Understood, sir. Vasquez. Harding's voice stopped her as she turned to go. You're not authorized to engage unless they fire first. Clear. She hesitated. Rules of engagement were important. She understood that. But they were also the reason soldiers sometimes died when they didn't have to. And if I see hostile action that has resulted in fire yet, weapons being shouldered, RPGs being armed, Harding's jaw worked for a moment. Then you use your judgment. That's why I'm putting you out there. Elena nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the gathering darkness. The terrain between the convoy and the outcropping was rough but navigable. Elena moved with the patience of a hunter, using the fading light to mask her movement, staying low against the rocky ground. Her breathing was controlled, her footsteps silent. The M24 was a familiar weight across her back, balanced and ready. She thought about the soldiers watching her go, about the looks on their faces as she'd walked into the darkness alone, about Torres's dismissive comments in the vehicle, Brennan's dead-weight insult, the years of being shuffled from assignment to assignment because nobody believed she could be what she actually was. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the ridge and whatever waited on it, and the convoy full of soldiers counting on her to keep them alive. She reached the outcropping with 3 minutes to spare. The rocks here were weathered and broken, providing excellent cover while allowing clear sight lines to the ridge above. She settled into a prone position, adjusting her body until the rifle felt like an extension of her own skeleton. Then she brought the scope to her eye and began to scan. The ridge revealed its secrets reluctantly. Shadows pooled in the crevices and valleys of rock, making it difficult to distinguish natural formations from human shapes. But Elena was patient. She'd spent hundreds of hours on rifle ranges, learning to read terrain through a scope, learning to see what others missed. There, a figure, crouched behind a boulder approximately 600 meters away. The fading light glinted off metal, a rifle barrel perhaps, or the tube of an RPG. She shifted her view. Another figure, 15 meters to the left, and another beyond that. The ridge was populated with shadows that didn't belong there. Elena counted 7 contacts before she ran out of visible targets. There could be more, hidden in defilade, waiting for the convoy to enter the kill zone before revealing themselves. 7 that she could see. Probably more that she couldn't. Her odds weren't great, but they were better than the convoy's odds if it tried to push through without overwatch. She reached for a flashlight and clicked it twice. Red light pulsed into the darkness. 2 flashes. Signal received. Below her, she heard engines roar to life. The convoy began to move. Elena tracked the lead vehicle through her peripheral vision while keeping her scope trained on the ridge. The MRAP ground forward, its massive wheels chewing through the rough terrain. Behind it, the rest of the column followed, a serpent of armor and steel winding through the mountain pass. The figures on the ridge didn't move. Elena's finger rested beside the trigger guard, ready but not committed. The rules of engagement were clear. She couldn't fire until they fired first, or until she observed hostile action that demonstrated immediate intent to harm. But she could see them shifting now, adjusting their positions as the convoy drew closer. They were preparing. They were waiting for the optimal moment, for the convoy to reach the narrowest point of the road where escape would be impossible. The lead vehicle passed below her position. Still no fire from the ridge. Second vehicle. Third. The figures above were moving more openly now, confident in the darkness, confident that no one could see them. Elena watched one of them shoulder what was unmistakably an RPG-7, the distinctive silhouette of the launcher visible through her scope. He was aiming at the 4th vehicle, the one carrying the most wounded. Hostile action, immediate threat, judgment call. Elena didn't hesitate. She adjusted her aim 1 degree left to account for wind, 2 degrees up for the elevation difference, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The RPG operator's head snapped back, and he crumpled behind his boulder, the unfired rocket clattering down the slope. For a fraction of a second, silence hung over the mountains. Then the ridge exploded with muzzle flashes. Gunfire poured down on the convoy from multiple positions. AK-47s and PKMs opening up in a coordinated fusillade. The lead vehicle's windows spiderwebbed with impacts. Rounds sparked off armor plating. Soldiers began returning fire, their M4s barking into the darkness. But they couldn't see their targets. The ridge was too far, the darkness too complete. Elena could see everything. She worked the bolt and found her second target, a machine gunner feeding a belt into a PKM. The rifle cracked, and he slumped over his weapon. Third target, a rifleman trying to reposition for a better angle on the convoy. Down. Fourth target, another RPG preparing to fire. Down before he could shoulder the weapon. The enemy fire began to slacken. The convoy was still moving, vehicles accelerating as fast as the terrain would allow. Elena tracked their progress while continuing to engage targets on the ridge. Fifth shooter. 6. Her world narrowed to the scope, the trigger, the cycling of the bolt. She had 23 rounds. She'd fired 6. 7 contacts confirmed. At least 1 down before she'd started shooting. Killed by his own panic when he tried to flee. That left. Muzzle flashed to her right. Elena rolled just as rounds cracked through the space where her head had been. Secondary position. They'd flanked her after all. Coming around the base of the outcropping where she hadn't expected them. She pulled a rifle with her, but the scope was wrong for close range. She could hear footsteps on rock, multiple shooters closing on her position from less than 50 meters away. No time to aim. No time to think. Elena surged to her feet and threw herself behind a larger boulder as rounds hammered into the stone around her. She pulled her sidearm, an M9 that suddenly felt very small compared to the M24. 2 shooters, maybe 3, moving to encircle her. The first one came around the boulder at a dead run, his AK-47 leading the way. Elena fired twice, both rounds catching in the chest, and he went down in a spray of dust. The second shooter appeared from a different angle, firing as he moved. Elena felt something slam into her side, an impact like a punch from God, but her body armor held. She returned fire, 3 rounds, and he stumbled and fell. Where was the third? She heard movement behind her and spun, but she was too slow. The rifle but caught her across the face, and the world dissolved into stars and darkness. She hit the ground hard, the M9 spinning away across the rocks. Blood filled her mouth, hot and copper-tasting. She could see a figure standing over her. K-47 rays, barrel pointed at her head. He said something in a language she didn't understand. It sounded like a prayer. Elena's hand found a rock, palm-sized, sharp-edged. She threw it with everything she had left. It caught him in the throat. He staggered back, choking, rifle wavering. Elena rolled to her feet, closed the distance, and drove her knee into his chest. He went down, and she went with him, her hands finding his rifle, ripping it from his grip, reversing it. The single shot echoed off the mountains. Then silence. Elena stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, the AK-47 still in her hands. Her side ached where the round had impacted her armor. Her face was wet with blood from where the rifle, but it split her cheek. Her hands were shaking, but she was alive. And below her, the convoy was still moving. She retrieved her weapons and climbed back to her overwatch position. The ridge was quiet now, the surviving attackers either dead or fled. The convoy's taillights were disappearing around a bend in the road, red eyes vanishing into the mountain darkness. Elena keyed her radio. Overwatch to command. Ridge is clear. Count 9 enemy Kia. Continuing to provide coverage until you're through the pass. Static. Then Harding's voice, rough with something that might have been relief. Copy that, Overwatch. Extraction team is standing by. Proceed to Rally Point Delta when able. Roger. She held her position for another 20 minutes, watching the darkness, listening to the silence. Nothing moved on the ridge. Nothing moved anywhere. When she finally stood up, her legs nearly gave out beneath her. The extraction team found her 30 minutes later, sitting on a rock at the rally point with the M24 across her knees. She was still bleeding from the cut on her face, still favoring her bruised ribs, still shaking from the combination of adrenaline crash and delayed shock. But she was smiling. Private Collins was the first one out of the vehicle, a medic kit in his hands. He stopped short when he saw her, his expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and something that looked almost like respect. Jesus, Vasquez, what happened to your face? Someone tried to use it as a rifle rest. Did you? He didn't. Collins knelt beside her and began cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. The alcohol burned like fire, but Elena didn't flinch. She'd earned worse scars than this one would become. The convoy made it through, Collins said. Everyone's at FOB Griffin. No casualties after you did whatever the hell you did up there. Good. Colonel wants to see you. Soon as you're ambulatory. Elena nodded slowly. She'd expected that. The reckoning was coming, the accounting for everything she'd done. Unauthorized engagement, destruction of enemy personnel, acting without orders, without oversight, without anyone's permission but her own. She'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Collins finished bandaging her face and helped her to her feet. The ride to FOB Griffin took 40 minutes over rough terrain, and Elena spent most of it staring out the window at the mountains sliding past. They looked different in the darkness, softer somehow, their harsh edges hidden by shadow. She wondered how many eyes were watching from those shadows. How many more attacks were being planned in hidden valleys and remote camps? How many soldiers would face what she'd face tonight, and how many of them wouldn't walk away? The base appeared out of the darkness like a beacon, its perimeter lights cutting through the night. Gates opened, vehicles passed through, and suddenly she was surrounded by the organized chaos of a forward operating base at night. Soldiers moved between buildings, vehicles rumbled past, radios crackled with constant communication. It felt like home. Colonel Harding was waiting for her in the command post, a converted shipping container that served as a tactical operations center. He was alone, which surprised her. She'd expected an audience for whatever was coming. Sit down, Corporal. Elena sat. Harding studied her for a long moment, his eyes lingering on the bandage covering half her face. Medic says you have 2 cracked ribs, a severe facial laceration, and probable concussion. I've had worse, sir. I doubt that. He pulled a chair across from her and sat down, his movements heavy with exhaustion. For the first time, Elena noticed how old he looked. The deployment had aged him, the weight of command carving lines into his face that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "I've been doing this for 27 years, Harding said. "I've seen a lot of soldiers do a lot of things. Some of them brave, some of them stupid, some of them both." He paused. "What you did today falls into a category I don't have a name for." "Sir, I'm talking." Elena closed her mouth. "In Kalwar, you abandoned your assigned post, acquired a weapon without authorization, and engaged enemy combatants without orders. By any standard interpretation of military regulations, I should be preparing you for a court-martial." The words hung in the air between them. "Instead," Harding continued, "I'm preparing a commendation, because what you did in Kalwar saved lives. 14 confirmed kills, multiple friendly saves, complete disruption of an enemy ambush. That's the kind of performance that gets medals, not prison sentences." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. "Sir, I—" Still talking. A ghost of a smile crossed Harding's face. "Then there's what happened tonight. I ordered you into an overwatch position with no backup, minimal ammunition, and a clear probability of enemy contact. You accepted that assignment without hesitation. And when the attack came, you didn't just survive it, you dominated it." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. 9 confirmed kills. Single shooter. At ranges from 600 meters down to hand, against a force that outnumbered you 9-1. He shook his head slowly. "I've seen designated marksmen with 10 years of experience who couldn't have done what you did tonight. I had good training, sir." "Don't be modest, Corporal. It doesn't suit you." Elena met his eyes. "What happens now, sir?" Harding was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer, somehow more human. "When I first heard about what you did in Kalwar, my instinct was to throw the book at you. You broke protocol. You violated command structure. You acted without authorization. Those things matter, Vasquez. They matter because discipline is what keeps units alive, what keeps soldiers from making stupid decisions that get people killed. I understand that, sir. But—" he held up a hand. "But there are moments when the rules aren't enough. Moments when waiting for authorization means watching soldiers die. Moments when someone has to act, regardless of what the regulations say." He paused. "You recognized that moment, and you acted." Elena didn't know what to say. She'd spent so long preparing for the consequences of her actions that acceptance felt foreign, almost suspicious. "I'm reassigning you," Harding said, effective immediately. "You're no longer attached to supply logistics." "Sir, the sniper section lost 2 operators last month. They've been running understrength ever since. I'm filling one of those slots with you." The words took a moment to process. Elena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You're putting me in a sniper section? I'm not MOS qualified. I don't have the—" "You have the skills, Corporal. The paperwork can catch up later." Harding stood, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. "Report to Sergeant Major Webb at 0700 tomorrow. He'll brief you on your new assignment." Elena rose to her feet, her mind still spinning. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." Harding moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "One more thing, Vasquez." "Sir, the soldier who changed your qualification scores back in 2014, Captain Bennett. Do you know what happened to him?" Elena's jaw tightened. "No, sir. I stopped tracking his career. He was forced into early retirement last year. Something about falsifying records and conduct unbecoming." Harding's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like satisfaction. "Turns out you weren't the only one he did that to. Just the only one who kept going anyway." He disappeared into the night before she could respond. Elena stood alone in the command post, the weight of everything that had happened settling onto her shoulders. 2 ambushes, 14 kills in the first, 9 in the second, cracked ribs, split face, hands that still trembled when she wasn't paying attention, and a new assignment that would put her exactly where she'd always belonged. She thought about the soldiers she'd saved. Lieutenant Chun, evacuated to Germany, expected to recover. The wounded loaded into vehicles during the first ambush. The convoy that had passed through the second kill zone intact because she'd been on that ridge in the darkness, doing what needed to be done. She thought about Brennan calling her dead weight. Dead weight doesn't save lives. Sleep came slowly that night, interrupted by dreams of muzzle flashes and falling bodies. But when Elena awoke in the thin light of dawn, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Sergeant Major Webb was a barrel-chested man with 3 combat tours and a face that looked like it had been carved from weathered stone. He studied Elena's service record for a long moment without speaking, his expression giving nothing away. "You're the supply corporal who turned into a sniper overnight," he said finally. "I was always a sniper, Sergeant Major. The Army just didn't believe it." Webb grunted. "Colonel says you put down 9 hostiles on that ridge last night. Single-handed. Close quarters and long range both." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "And before that, you broke an ambush in Colwell with 14 kills in 3 minutes." "I didn't count. I was busy." The corner of Webb's mouth twitched. "You got an attitude, Vasquez." "I've been told that, Sergeant Major." He stood and gestured for her to follow. "Come on. Time to meet the team you're joining." The sniper section was quartered in a long, low building at the edge of the FOB. Inside, Elena found 3 soldiers cleaning weapons, the sharp smell of gun oil filling the air. They looked up as she entered, their eyes taking the bandage on her face, the M24 slung across her back, the new insignia on her shoulder. "This is Corporal Vasquez," Webb announced. "She's taking Miller's slot. Treat her like you'd treat any other new sniper." One of the soldiers, a lean man with sergeant stripes and eyes that held the flat calm of a predator, stood and extended his hand. "Sergeant Rivera, I heard about what you did at Colwer and on the ridge. That's some serious work, Corporal." Elena shook his hand. "I got lucky." "Lucky is surviving. What you did took skill." Rivera gestured to the other 2. "That's Specialist Chun, no relation to Lieutenant, and Corporal Drake. They're the rest of our team." Chun nodded. Drake just stared, his expression unreadable. "I know what you're thinking," Elena said, addressing all 3. "You're wondering if I can really do what people say I did. If the supply corporal is actually sniper material, or she just got lucky and the colonel made a mistake." "Actually," Drake said, "I was wondering how long it's going to take you to prove yourself. How about now?" Elena unslung the M24 and held it out. "Pick a target. Any range up to 800 meters. I'll show you what I can do." Drake and Chin exchanged glances. Rivera just smiled. "Range is open," he said. "Let's see what you've got." The firing range at FOB Griffin was a narrow valley that had been cleared of debris and fitted with targets at regular intervals. Elena settled into position at the 500-meter line, the familiar weight of the M24 pressed against her shoulder. Rivera stood behind her with binoculars. Winds coming from the left, maybe 6 knots. Temperatures dropping, which affects bullet drop, and the light's still bad. "I know." She adjusted her scope, making minute corrections for the conditions he'd described. The target was a humanoid silhouette, chest and head visible above a simulated barricade. At 500 meters, it looked like a speck through her naked eye. Through the scope, it was everything. Elena let out half a breath, felt her heartbeat slow, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked. Half a second later, Rivera's voice confirmed the result. "Center mass. Dead on." She worked the bolt without removing her eye from the scope and fired again and again. 5 rounds, 5 hits, a grouping that could be covered by a playing card. "Move me back," she said. They went to 600 meters. Same result. 700, 800. At each distance, Elena placed her shots with precision of a machine, her groupings tight enough to make Rivera whistle under his breath. When she finally stood up, Drake was staring at her with an expression that had shifted from skepticism to something else entirely. "How the hell does a supply corporal shoot like that?" "I wasn't always supply corps." "Clearly." Rivera clapped her on the shoulder. "Welcome to the team, Vasquez. You'll do just fine." The next 3 weeks were the hardest Elena had faced since basic training. Sniper operations involved more than just shooting. There was fieldcraft, the art of moving through terrain without being seen. There was observation, spending hours watching a location without moving. There was communication, coordinating with ground forces and air support. There was mathematics, calculating ballistic solutions for distances and conditions that most soldiers would never encounter. Elena absorbed it all. She ran drills until her legs burned and her lungs ached. She practiced camouflage until she could disappear into terrain that offered no cover. She studied wind patterns and bullet trajectories until the calculations became instinct. And she shot, morning and evening, whenever the range was available. She fired round after round until her shoulder was bruised and her ears rang despite protection. She pushed her limits, extending her effective range, learning to compensate for conditions that would have defeated lesser shooters. By the end of the third week, Rivera declared her ready for operational deployment. "You've got good instincts," he told her. "Better than most soldiers I've trained. The Kalwar incident wasn't a fluke. I knew that. Now we all know it." Their first mission together came on a Tuesday morning, a reconnaissance operation in the mountains east of the FOB. Intelligence suggested a Taliban logistics route ran through a particular valley, and command wanted eyes on it. Elena spent 43 hours in a hide site overlooking the valley, barely moving, barely breathing, watching through her scope for any sign of enemy activity. When a convoy finally appeared, 3 trucks loaded with weapons and ammunition, she called it in. The airstrike that followed destroyed all 3 vehicles and their contents. "Good work," Webb told her afterward. "Clean intelligence, clean strike, no collateral damage." It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt like the beginning. The missions kept coming. Reconnaissance, Overwatch, targeted elimination. Elena proved herself again and again, building a reputation that spread to the FOB and beyond. The supply corporal who'd become a sniper. The dead weight who'd saved a convoy. The soldier who'd earned her place through fire. Brennan returned from medical treatment 8 weeks after Kalwar. His arm had been repaired. Titanium pins, extensive physical therapy, limited mobility that would probably keep him off long-range weapons for the rest of his career. Elena was in the mess hall when he found her. "Vasquez." She looked up from her meal. Brennan stood there, his right arm in a sling, his expression complicated. "Sergeant." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I called you dead weight," Brennan said finally, "back before Kalwar. I remember. I was wrong." Elena set down her fork. She'd imagined this conversation 100 times, planned the things she would say, the anger she would express. But now that the moment was here, all of that seemed irrelevant. "You weren't entirely wrong," she said. "In that context, I was dead weight. Supply corps attached to a combat unit. I wasn't pulling my weight in the missions you were running. But that wasn't all of who you were." "No, it wasn't." Brennan was silent for a moment. "I heard about what you did on the ridge. 9 kills, including 3 at close quarters when they flanked your position. Word gets around. You saved my life in Kalwar. Probably saved the colonel's life too, and a dozen others. And I just finished telling everyone who'd listen that you didn't belong there." Elena met his eyes. She saw something there that might have been shame or guilt or the uncomfortable awareness of a debt that couldn't easily be repaid. "We all make assumptions," Elena said. "We all judge people before we know them. I spent 3 years letting those assumptions define me, letting other people's opinions determine what I could achieve. That was my mistake, not yours. You shouldn't have had to prove yourself the way you did. You shouldn't have had to save an entire convoy just to get people to see what you could do. Maybe not, but that's how it happened. And if I'm being honest," she smiled slightly, "I wouldn't change it, because now there's no doubt. Now everyone knows exactly what I can do." Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his good hand. "I'd be honored to serve with you, Corporal. Any time, any place." Elena shook his hand. "Likewise, Sergeant." The winter months brought a reduction in enemy activity, as was typical in the Afghan theater. But spring would come, and with it, a renewed offensive that would test everything Elena had learned. She was ready. The assignment came in April, as the mountain passes cleared and the Taliban began moving forces and supplies through routes that had been frozen shut for months. Intelligence had identified a high-value target, a regional commander responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. The mission was straightforward on paper. Infiltrate the target area, establish a hide site, wait for commander to show himself, and eliminate him. In practice, it was the most dangerous operation Elena had been assigned. She went in with Rivera and Drake, 3 snipers moving through hostile territory with no air support and minimal extraction options if things went wrong. They spent 4 days in the mountains, working their way toward a valley where the commander was expected to meet with subordinate leaders. On the 5th day, they found their position. The hide site overlooked a compound in the valley below, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. Elena sailed into position and began her watch, the M24 scope revealing every detail of the scene below. For 2 days, nothing happened. Fighters came and went, but none of them matched the profile of the target. Elena remained motionless, her world narrowing to the circle of her scope, the rhythm of her breathing, the endless calculations of distance and wind and light. On the 3rd day, a convoy arrived, 3 vehicles, armored SUVs that looked out of place in the rural setting. Elena watched them approach, counting the fighters who emerged, assessing their weapons and equipment, and then he stepped out. The commander was a tall man with a distinctive scar running down the left side of his face. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd survived 100 close calls, who believed himself invincible. Elena's finger moved the trigger. "I have eyes on target," she breathed into her radio, requesting confirmation. Rivera's voice came back, steady. "Confirmed. Target is viable. You are cleared to engage." 1,100 meters. Wind from the southwest, maybe 8 knots. Elevation difference of approximately 40 meters. Elena calculated the solution in her head, adjusting her scope with minute movements. The commander was speaking with one of his subordinates, gesturing toward the mountains where Elena lay hidden. For a moment, she wondered if he could sense her presence, if some instinct was warning him of the danger. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle spoke. Through her scope, she watched the commander jerk and fall, his subordinate spraying blood as the round continued through. Pandemonium erupted in the compound below. Fighters scrambling for cover, vehicles attempting to flee, weapons firing blindly into the mountains. Elena was already moving. Target down. Secondary target down. Moving to extraction point. They ran through terrain that offered no cover. Enemy fire pursuing them as the survivors in the compound organized a response. Rivera took a round in the shoulder but kept moving, blood streaming down his arm. Drake called in the extraction, shouting coordinates into his radio as rounds cracked past his head. The helicopter arrived 23 minutes later, its door guns roaring as it swooped low over the valley. Elena covered their extraction, firing the last rounds in her magazine at enemies who emerged from cover, keeping them pinned until Rivera and Drake could scramble aboard. Then she threw herself through the helicopter's door, and they were airborne, climbing away from the chaos below. Rivera was laughing, despite the blood loss, despite the close call. "Vasquez, that was the cleanest shot I've ever seen. 1,100 meters, bad wind, moving elevation. That's not just skill. That's art." Elena leaned back against the helicopter's bulkhead, her heart still pounding, her hands still shaking. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." "Yeah." He shook his head slowly. "Some job." The promotion came 2 weeks later. Elena stood at attention in the command post while Colonel Harding read the commendation. The words washed over her. Distinguished service, extraordinary valor, exemplary performance under fire. But they didn't register the way she'd expected them to. What registered was a look in Harding's eyes when he pinned the new insignia on her shoulder. Respect, acknowledgement, the recognition that she had earned her place through action, not paperwork. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said, "on behalf of the United States Army, I am honored to present you with this promotion and with a Bronze Star with Valor for your actions on April 17th. Your performance reflects the highest traditions of military service." "Thank you, sir." He stepped back, studying her with an expression that had changed so much since that first confrontation in Kalwar. "When you first grabbed that rifle, I asked who had authorized you to fire." "I remember, sir." "I know the answer now." His voice was quiet. Nobody authorized you. You authorized yourself. Because in that moment, you understood something that a lot of soldiers never learn. Authority comes from competence, from the willingness to act when action is needed, from being the person who steps up when everyone else is waiting for permission. Elena met his eyes. I just did what needed to be done, sir. That's exactly the point. Harding nodded slowly. Most soldiers do what they're told. Good soldiers do what they're told. Well, great soldiers do what needs to be done, whether they're told or not. That's what separates competence from excellence. He extended his hand. You've got a hell of a career ahead of you, Sergeant. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Elena shook his hand, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The years of dismissal, the assignments that had wasted her potential, the assumptions that had kept her counting boxes instead of saving lives. All of it had led here. She walked out of command post into the Afghan sunlight, her new insignia catching the light. Across the base, she could see soldiers go about their duties, cleaning weapons, loading vehicles, preparing for the next mission. They glanced at her as she passed, and she saw something different in their eyes now. Not skepticism, not dismissal, respect. Rivera found her near the sniper section's quarters, sitting on a stack of supply crates with the M24 across her knees. He was still recovering from his wound, his arm in a sling, but his smile was genuine. Congratulations, Sergeant. Thanks. He sat down beside her. You know, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've seen a lot of soldiers come and go. Some of them were good. Some of them were exceptional. But I've never seen anyone go from zero to where you are now in the time you did it. Elena ran her hand along the rifle stock. I didn't go from zero. I just finally got the chance to show what I could do. That's not the same thing? No. She looked at him. It's really not. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun climb higher in the Afghan sky. What happens now? Rivera asked. Now we keep going. There are more missions, more targets, more soldiers who need Overwatch. And I'll be there for all of it. And after? When the deployment's over. Elena thought about that, about the world waiting back home, the country she'd sworn to protect, the life she put on hold to be here. She thought about all the soldiers who doubted her and all the ones who hadn't, about Brennan calling her deadweight and Harding telling her she'd earned her place. After? She smiled. After, I'll figure out the next thing. Same as everyone else. Fair enough. Rivera pushed himself to his feet, wincing slightly at the movement. Get some rest, Sergeant. We've got a briefing at 1400 for the next operation. Colonel wants you on point. I'll be there. He walked away, leaving her alone with her rifle and her thoughts. Elena sat there for a long time, watching the activity around her, feeling the sun on her face and the weight of the weapon in her hands. She thought about Kalwer, about the moment when everything had changed, the smoke and chaos of that ambush, the colonel's voice demanding to know who had authorized her to fire. She thought about the ridge, about the darkness and the gunfire and the desperate struggle to survive. She thought about all the shots she'd taken, all the lives she'd saved, all the enemies she put down. And she thought about the ones who doubted her, the officer who'd changed her scores, the sergeants who'd dismissed her, the soldiers who'd written her off as dead weight. They'd all been wrong. Not because she'd proven them wrong, though she had, but because they'd made assumptions about who she was based on nothing more than her appearance, her assignment, her gender. They looked at her and seen what they expected to see, not what was actually there. That was their failure, not hers. Elena stood up, slinging the M24 across her back with the practiced ease of someone who'd carried it through fire and shadow. She had a briefing to attend, a mission to prepare for, a team to lead. She wasn't dead weight anymore. She never had been. As she walked toward the command post, the sun rose higher over the Afghan mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and amber. It was the same sun that had risen over Kalwer, over the ridge, over every moment that had brought her here, and would rise again tomorrow, over whatever challenge came next. Elena Vasquez, Sergeant, United States Army Sniper Section, walked into the light. She was ready. Elena Vasquez's story shows us that authority isn't given. It's earned in the moments that matter most. If this story kept you engaged, hit that like button and let me know you made it to the end. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to act without authorization because waiting would have cost too much? What happened? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one.